Hello everyone, I'm very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
You know, they always say family is everything, but what they forget to mention is how often family takes everything for granted until you finally, and maybe a little too late, decide to stop giving. I spent 7 long, grinding years paying for my parents' mortgage, a house I didn't even live in anymore, and somehow, somewhere along the line, they forgot who was keeping that damn roof over their heads. They forgot whose back was breaking a little more every year so they could sit in their kitchen and sip coffee in peace, so they could pretend like the walls around them were just another part of God's given security, not bought with sacrifice, not kept alive by somebody who never once demanded a thank you. It started back when my dad, Harold, lost his job. He was nearing 60 back then, already tired, already more bent than upright after a lifetime working the loading docks at the mill. My mom, Linda, was doing what she could cleaning houses, mostly, when her arthritis would let her, but it wasn't enough to cover the mortgage, the groceries, the endless piles of utility bills. They called me one night, voices low, trembling almost, asking if I could help out a little until things got better. And what are you supposed to say to that? What kind of man would I be if I said no? So I picked up a second job bartending after my 9 to 5 at the auto parts warehouse. I ate fast food in my car between shifts, wore shoes with holes in them for 2 winters in a row, and watched as my friends bought new cars, booked vacations to Mexico, while I calculated how many hours I needed to pull to keep my parents' lights on. They never asked for all that, not outright. But need has a way of settling heavy on your shoulders even when nobody says it out loud. At first, it was temporary, a bridge, a few months, maybe a year at most. But months turned into seasons, seasons into years, and before I knew it, 7 years had passed like smoke out of a tailpipe. I kept waiting for the call telling me Dad had gotten another job, that they could take it from here, but that call never came. They got used to it. And somewhere deep inside, a part of me got used to being used. I never bragged about it, never told girlfriends or coworkers, never tried to make myself look like some kind of saint. It was just what you do for the people who raised you, right? You suck it up. You grow calluses where the blisters used to be. You stop keeping score because if you start, you realize real fast just how damn unfair life can get when you care more than the people around you. Ever been the one who quietly does everything right until somebody spits in your face like you were never there? What would you have done if you were me? The thing about resentment is that it doesn't come crashing in like a tidal wave. It seeps in slow, a drip 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 against your ribs until you don't even realize how heavy you're carrying until something finally snaps. And for me, that snap came with one phone call on a muggy Thursday afternoon. I was at work, elbows deep in grease and bad tempers, trying to explain to some guy why his alternator wasn't covered under warranty, when my phone buzzed against my hip. I ignored it at first, figuring it was just another scam call or maybe Tom, my buddy, wanting to meet for a beer later. But it kept buzzing, 5, 6 times, back to back, until my manager shot me a look that said, "Answer the damn thing before I throw it in the trash." So I wiped my hands on my jeans and answered, not even checking who it was. "Hey, Mikey," my mom's voice crackled through the line, bright and cheerful in that way she got when she was about to drop news that wasn't really optional. "Guess what? Your sister's moving back home for a while." I stood there, blinking in the sunlight outside the bay doors, heart thudding stupidly in my chest. For a second, I thought maybe I'd misheard. Jenny, my sister, the golden child, the one who always knew how to smile pretty and get people to clean up her messes, was coming back? After 15 years of chasing dead-end dreams from Nashville to Vegas to God knows where, she was bringing all that wreckage back to the one place I had killed myself to keep standing. I said, intelligently. "When?" "Oh, next week, probably." Mom chirped. "She's gonna need a place to stay while she figures things out, you know? It's only temporary." Temporary. The same damn word they'd used on me 7 years ago. I leaned against the sun-warmed cinder block wall and stared at nothing, feeling something cold settle in my gut. Temporary had a way of turning into permanent around here. I knew that better than anyone. Yeah, I said finally, voice tight. Sure. Sounds great. I hung up before I could say something I'd regret. Before I could remind her that I didn't actually live there anymore. Before I could ask why nobody thought it might be polite to ask if I had a goddamn opinion about it. The thing about being the good son is that nobody thinks you have limits. They just assume you'll keep catching everything they throw, no matter how heavy, no matter how broken, no matter how unfair. And most of the time, you do. Because it's easier than making a scene. Easier than explaining to the people you love most that love without respect feels a whole lot like being buried alive. That night, I drove home to my one-bedroom apartment, sat on my crappy couch, cracked open a beer, and stared at the ceiling, wondering what fresh hell was about to unfold. I should have seen it coming. I should have known better than to think things could stay quiet forever. When you're the good son, nobody notices until you stop being good. And God help you when you finally do. The first thing you need to understand about Jenny is that she has always been the storm in every room she walked into, the kind of person who could make you feel like you were standing in the wrong place just by breathing a little louder than everybody else. She wasn't a bad person, at least not in the traditional sense, but she carried herself like life owed her something and had just been real slow about paying up. Jenny, my little sister who wasn't so little anymore, rolled into town in a battered white SUV packed to the windows with her life's debris, clothes crammed into garbage bags, chipped furniture held together with duct tape, and a beat-up guitar she hadn't played seriously in years, but still carted around like some badge of honor. The day she arrived, it was hotter than hell outside, the kind of heavy, syrupy heat that sticks your shirt to your back before you even get out of the car. I pulled into my parents' driveway just in time to see her slam the door of her SUV with her hip, balancing a too-large purse and a tray of coffees like she was walking into a damn audition. Mom, of course, came flying out the front door like she'd just seen a miracle, arms wide, eyes shining, calling Jenny's name like she was some prodigal daughter returned from war. Mike, she said, noticing me with a little too much surprise, as if it hadn't crossed her mind that I might show up to help unload all that crap. Isn't it great? Jenny's home for a while. Home. That word hit different when you realized it hadn't been yours in a long, long time. I plastered on a smile because that's what you do when you're the good son who shows up even when nobody really asked him to, and I grabbed a few boxes out of the back of her car without being told. The boxes smelled faintly of old cigarettes and too many bad road trips, and inside were the kinds of things you keep when you're running from place to place without ever settling anywhere. Cheap costume jewelry, worn-out boots, old pay stubs from gigs that never led anywhere. Jenny floated past me into the house like she was on parade, cooing at how little had changed, throwing her stuff in the living room like she was reclaiming a throne. Within the first hour, she'd already decided the curtains needed changing, the dining room was too cluttered, and that Dad needed to move his recliner somewhere less depressing. Mom just nodded and fussed around her like a maid in a Victorian drama, asking if she wanted iced tea or lemonade, if she was tired, if she needed money, and Dad, bless his stubborn heart, just grunted from behind his newspaper, pretending none of this was happening. I, meanwhile, stood in the doorway watching this unfold, feeling like a stranger at a family reunion nobody remembered inviting me to. The real gut punch came later that evening when I wandered into the garage to grab a wrench for Dad's stubborn lawnmower and found a dozen black trash bags piled in the corner. At first, I thought maybe they were just cleaning out some junk, but something gnawed at me, something ugly and familiar. I pulled one open and there it was, my old baseball glove, stiff with time but still carrying the faint smell of leather and dust and boyhood summers under the hot sun. Buried underneath it was a shoebox of trophies, cheap gold plastic dulled with age, and a stack of photo albums, pages sticking together from the humidity. I dug deeper, heart hammering in my chest, and found more yearbooks, my old varsity jacket, a box of stupid childhood treasures that meant nothing to anybody but me. Someone had packed up my entire history into trash bags like it was just junk taking up space, like it wasn't the only proof I had that I had ever belonged here at all. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Jenny standing there, arms crossed, sipping her iced coffee with that casual, dismissive air she'd perfected over years of never having to answer for anything. "What the hell is this?" I asked, holding up the glove, my voice tighter than I meant it to be. She shrugged, a little smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth, the kind of smirk that said she was about 3 seconds away from rolling her eyes. "Relax, Mike. You don't even live here anymore. Chill out." 8 words, casual as a flicked cigarette, and just like that, she set fire to the whole goddamn thing. I stood there, mouth dry, fingers tightening around the worn leather of that glove like it was the only thing keeping me grounded to the floor. I wanted to yell, to smash something, to remind her who had been paying the bills while she was out chasing dreams that crashed harder than a drunk driver on an icy road. I wanted to make her understand what it felt like to be erased from your own home by someone who had never lifted more than a damn latte for this family. But I didn't. I didn't do anything at all except turn on my heel and walk out to the curb, dragging one of the trash bags behind me like a body. I sat down on the curb, the sun sinking low and angry in the sky, and pulled out an old photo, the edges curled and cracked. It was me and Dad at my first Little League game, both of us grinning like idiots, his hand heavy on my shoulder, mine clutching a bat almost bigger than I was. The photo tore in my hands without me meaning it to. A clean rip, right down the middle. Just like that, 7 years, 2 jobs, and every good thing I'd tried to be for them felt like it had been split wide open, left flapping in the hot, useless wind. And there I sat, silent and burning, with nothing but a torn photo and a heart pounding too hard in my chest to pretend that everything was still okay. I must have sat out there on the curb for the better part of an hour, just holding that torn photograph like it was some kind of open wound, bleeding memories all over my hands while the rest of the world carried on without noticing. Eventually, the sun dipped behind the trees, and the mosquitoes came out, and I realized nobody had even bothered to come check on me. Maybe they thought I'd just gotten over it, like every other damn thing I'd swallowed down over the years. Maybe they figured the good son would do what he always did, shake it off, take a deep breath, and come back inside with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Instead, I got in my truck, tossed the trash bag in the bed like it was radioactive, and drove straight to O'Malley's, the only bar in town where the chairs still wobbled and the jukebox ate your dollars half the time, but the beer was cold and the bartender poured heavy. Tom was already there, perched on his usual stool with a basket of fries he probably wasn't planning to share and a look on his face that said he wasn't surprised to see me. I slammed the door behind me a little harder than I meant to and dropped into the seat next to him, ignoring the curious glances from a few of the regulars. Tom slid a fresh bottle of Bud across the counter toward me without a word, and for a while, we just sat there in silence, letting the noise of the bar fill up the cracks in the conversation that hadn't even started yet. Finally, he broke the silence. "You look like someone ran over your dog and then sued you for emotional damages," he said, not unkindly. I laughed, but it was an ugly, hollow sound, scraping out of my chest like it didn't belong there. "It's just everything, man," I said, picking at the label on my beer. Jenny moves back in like she owns the place, starts tossing my stuff like it's garbage, and when I call her on it, she tells me to chill out because, and I quote, "You don't even live here anymore." Tom whistled low under his breath, shaking his head. "That's cold," he said. "Even for Jenny." "Yeah," I said, voice tight. "Cold doesn't even begin to cover it." He leaned back, giving me a long, measuring look. "But it's just stuff, right?" he said after a minute. "I mean, it sucks, sure, but at the end of the day, it's just old trophies and yearbooks." I wanted to agree with him. God knows it would have been easier if I could have just shrugged it off, let it go, chalked it up to one more kick in the ribs from the people you're supposed to be able to count on. But it wasn't just about the stuff. It was about everything the stuff represented, all the hours, all the sacrifices, All the quiet ways I had broken myself to keep that house standing, to keep Mom and Dad from having to face the humiliation of losing everything they'd worked for. It was about the missed vacations, the promotions I turned down because I couldn't afford to move farther away, the dates I bailed on because I was covering the mortgage payment that month and couldn't swing dinner and drinks on top of it. It was about the life I had put on hold, the dreams I'd shelved, the goddamn years I could never get back. I thought about the second job at Murphy's Garage, the way my hands had cracked and bled from cold winters spent fixing cars in an unheated shop. I thought about the nights I ate ramen noodles on the tailgate of my truck because I didn't have time to go home between shifts. I thought about every thank you I never got and every "you're selfish" that would probably come hurling out of Jenny's mouth the second I dared to stand up for myself. "It's not about the stuff," I said finally, voice low and shaking with something that felt too much like rage to be comfortable. "It's about the principle." Tom nodded slowly, like he got it even if he didn't have the words to say it out loud. After a couple more beers and a basket of wings that neither of us really touched, I found myself back at my apartment, sitting at the tiny kitchen table under the flickering overhead light, a pile of unopened mail spread out in front of me. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a thought had been gnawing at me all night, refusing to be ignored no matter how much I tried to drown it in cheap lager and greasy food. I dug through the stack of papers until I found it, the thick, yellowed envelope with the mortgage paperwork Mom had mailed me a few years back when there was some mix-up with the insurance. At the time, I hadn't given it much thought, too busy working double shifts to care about anything beyond the next paycheck. But now I had a reason to care. I slid the papers out and started flipping through them, heart pounding harder with every line I read. They're plain as day, buried in the legalese and fine print that nobody ever really reads unless they're desperate, was a name. My name, right next to Dad's in bold black ink. I wasn't just helping out. I wasn't just sending checks every month like some anonymous benefactor. I was a goddamn cosigner. Legally, financially, officially tied to that house like a ball and chain around my ankle. And that gave me a kind of leverage I hadn't even realized I had. I sat back in my chair, papers spread out in front of me like a battlefield map, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something crack open in my chest. Not anger, not hurt, not sadness, but something sharper and colder. An idea. A way to make sure nobody ever forgot again exactly who had kept that house standing when the world was ready to let it fall. The thought made my hands tremble a little, not from fear, but from something dangerously close to excitement. Because for once, it wouldn't be me swallowing the consequences. It would be them. That night, long after the city had gone quiet, and even the drunk idiots downstairs had stumbled off to their apartments, I sat there at my rickety kitchen table, staring at the mortgage papers like they might reach out and slap me across the face. Every now and then, I would rub my thumb over my name printed there, bold as anything, feeling the weight of what it meant settle deeper into my bones. I could not tell you how long I sat like that, mind racing, heart thudding with something sharp and ugly that would not let me rest. Part of me knew I could just let it go, that the easy thing would be to shove those papers back into the envelope, cram them in the back of a drawer, and pretend I had never seen them. After all, wasn't that what I had been doing for years now? Pretending I was fine, pretending it didn't bother me that I was footing the bill for a house I never slept in, pretending it didn't burn like acid every time someone forgot to say thank you. I had gotten real good at swallowing anger so long that I hardly recognized it anymore, like an old injury you just learned to limp around. But now I was looking at something that felt a hell of a lot like power, and power has a funny way of waking you up when you've been asleep too long. Still, guilt clung to me like a second skin, whispering that it wasn't their fault they depended on me, that I had offered to help, that family was supposed to mean sticking around even when it got hard. I thought about Mom, about how her hands had started shaking when she buttoned her coat, about Dad and how he stared out the window like the world had already passed him by. I thought about all the times they had patched my scraped knees and baked me birthday cakes even when money was tight. And then, Just as quick, I thought about Jenny, standing in that garage with her coffee and her smirk, tossing away my memories like yesterday's garbage without a second thought. I thought about Mom and Dad letting her, about how none of them even hesitated to make room for her by shoving me right out the door without a backward glance. I thought about how easy it had been for them to forget the son who had been breaking his back to keep the damn roof over their heads. So I sat there, teetering on the edge between guilt and anger, trying to figure out which one I could live with when the dust finally settled. Around 2 in the morning, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Sandra's name. Sandra and I had gone to high school together. She was a bulldog back then, and she was a bulldog now, one of the best damn real estate lawyers in the county. If anyone could tell me exactly how deep I was in this thing, it was her. It rang twice before she picked up, voice rough with sleep. "Mike?" She mumbled. "What the hell? You better be dying." "Sorry," I said, not sounding sorry at all. "I got a question. Mortgage stuff." There was a long pause, a sigh, then the rustle of blankets. "This better be good," she said, but I could already hear the shift in her tone, business mode kicking in like muscle memory. I laid it all out for her, from the cosigner status to the years of payments to the latest stunt with Jenny. I didn't leave anything out because if I was going to do this, I wasn't going to half-ass it. Sandra listened without interrupting, only grunting every now and then when I hit a particularly juicy detail. When I finally ran out of steam, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mike, legally, you have more leverage than you think. If your name is on the mortgage and you've been making the payments, you have standing. If you want, you can call the note, force a refinance, or even force a sale if they can't cover it." The words hit me like a cold slap, bracing and sharp. "You're saying I could make them sell the house?" "If you really wanted to," she said, voice matter of fact. "Or you could just demand to be bought out. Either way, you're not powerless here. Not by a long shot." I sat back, staring at the ceiling, feeling like the ground had shifted under me. This wasn't just anger talking anymore. This was law. This was justice, if you wanted to call it that. This was a way to stop being the family ATM machine they only noticed when the money didn't show up. Of course, it wouldn't be clean. Sandra warned me about that too. There would be screaming, guilt trips, crying, accusations flying like shrapnel from a grenade. Family doesn't take betrayal lying down, even if you're the one who's been betrayed 100 times over. "Think it through," Sandra said before she hung up. "You only get to pull a pin like that once. Make damn sure you're ready to deal with the explosion." I sat there long after the call ended, the apartment so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat, the steady drip of the faucet in the sink ticking off the seconds like a bomb. Maybe it was the beers still buzzing low in my veins, or maybe it was the months, hell, the years of swallowing shit I should have spit right back out, but something in me settled in that moment. Not rage. Not sadness. Resolve. I gathered up the mortgage papers, smoothed them out flat on the table, and started making a list of questions to ask the bank in the morning. It wasn't about being petty anymore. It wasn't about getting even with Jenny or proving a point to Mom and Dad. It was about finally standing up and saying enough. Enough of being used. Enough of being forgotten. Enough of pretending that loyalty meant letting yourself get crushed under somebody else's weight. When I finally smiled, a bitter, tight thing that felt foreign on my face, it was the first real smile I'd managed in weeks. Because this time, I wasn't going to be the one left holding the bag when everything went to hell. The thing about setting a trap is you have to make sure the bait looks sweet enough that nobody questions why it's sitting there in the first place. And that's exactly what I thought about when I pulled into my parents' driveway with a bottle of cheap red wine tucked under my arm and a grin so fake it could have been bought off a Halloween shelf. It was a Saturday night, and Mom had insisted we all get together for a family dinner, a phrase that used to mean something warm and safe when I was a kid, but now sounded about as inviting as sitting in front of a firing squad. I had spent the whole day planning how I was going to play it, smiling just the right amount, laughing at the right jokes, pretending like nothing was wrong while the hammer dangled just an inch above their heads, held up by the thinnest piece of thread I had left in me. The house looked the same as always from the outside, a little shabbier maybe, the paint peeling in places where the sun had beaten it down for years, but inside it was buzzing with a forced kind of cheer that made my skin crawl the second I stepped through the door. Jenny was already there, sprawled across Dad's old recliner like she owned the place, scrolling through her phone with one hand and sipping something fruity out of a plastic cup with the other. She didn't even bother to look up when I walked in, just shot me a little sideways smirk that was pure challenge, like she knew exactly how much she had gotten under my skin and was daring me to make a scene. Mom fluttered around the kitchen like a bird that had flown into the wrong house and couldn't figure out how to get out, and Dad sat at the table reading the newspaper. Pretending everything was normal in that way only a man who had been stubborn his whole life could pull off. I set the wine down on the counter with a cheerful, "Brought something for dinner," and earned a distracted "That's nice, honey," from Mom without so much as a glance. We ate spaghetti and meatballs off chipped plates while the conversation floated around like a balloon nobody really wanted to hold on to, full of meaningless updates about people I barely remembered from high school and stories about neighbors I didn't care about. I smiled and nodded and sipped my wine, letting the heat in my chest build slow and steady like a pot about to boil over, waiting for just the right moment. Jenny, meanwhile, couldn't have been more pleased with herself, tossing her hair and laughing too loud, making little jabs about how some people needed to learn how to relax and not take life so seriously. Every word out of her mouth was like a match flicked too close to gasoline, and I could see Mom hanging on every word, smiling that proud, bewildered smile that made it clear she didn't see a damn thing wrong. Finally, when the plates were pushed aside and the second bottle of wine was halfway gone, I leaned back in my chair, stretched my arms over my head, and said, as casually as if I were commenting on the weather, "Oh, by the way, I talked to the bank this week." Jenny looked up from her phone, blinking, a flash of irritation crossing her face like I had dared to interrupt her royal court. Mom paused in the middle of stacking plates, her hands going still. Dad lowered his newspaper by an inch, just enough to glance over it at me. I let the pause stretch out just a second too long before I continued, swirling the last sip of wine in my glass like it was no big deal. "Yeah," I said, "turns out they're going to have to reassess the mortgage now that my name's coming off it." Dead silence. The kind of silence that settles in your bones, making the tiny hairs on your arms stand up like they can feel the shift in the air even if your brain hasn't caught up yet. Jenny was the first to speak, of course. "What the hell does that mean?" she snapped, sitting up straighter, her voice high and sharp enough to cut glass. I shrugged, the very picture of innocence. "It means," I said slowly, like I was explaining to a particularly slow child, "that the loan gets recalculated without my income backing it. And, well, since Dad's on a fixed income and Mom's not exactly raking it in cleaning houses, payments are probably gonna, triple. Maybe more." Mom's face went pale, the blood draining out of it so fast I thought for a second she might faint right there at the table. Dad just stared at me over the rim of his glasses, his mouth a thin, hard line that said he understood exactly what was happening and exactly who was to blame. Jenny, though, she exploded like a goddamn firecracker. "You can't do that," she shrieked, slamming her plastic cup down so hard that the pink drink inside splashed out onto the table. "This is our home. You're being selfish, Mike." I laughed, an ugly, humorless sound that didn't even try to hide what I was feeling anymore. "Funny," I said, pushing my chair back from the table and standing up. "I thought it stopped being my home the second you started throwing my life in the trash." Mom started crying then, quiet little gasps that she tried to smother with her napkin, and Dad put a hand on her shoulder, his knuckles white. But I didn't look at them. I kept my eyes locked on Jenny, watched as the realization sank in, as the consequences of a decade of taking without giving finally came crashing down around her. She started crying too, big ugly sobs that echoed off the walls and made the whole house feel too small, too heavy with the kind of grief that comes when you finally realize you are not invincible. I stood there for a moment longer, drinking it all in, the twisted satisfaction and the deep, gnawing sadness that fought for space inside my chest. And then I turned and walked out the door, leaving the smell of burnt spaghetti and broken dreams behind me without a second glance. The thing about pulling the pin on a grenade is that you do not get to stand around afterward and admire the explosion without getting a little shrapnel yourself, and I realized that real fast as I stepped off the porch and heard the front door slam open behind me. I was halfway to my truck when Jenny came storming out, barefoot and furious, her voice slicing through the humid night air with the kind of shrillness that turns every neighbor's head without fail. "You ruined my life, Mike," she screamed, her hands flailing wildly like she might actually throw something if she could get her fingers on it fast enough. "You selfish, bitter, miserable bastard. How could you do this to us?" I turned slowly, the keys dangling from my hand, feeling that old familiar tug somewhere deep in my gut, that instinct to calm things down, to fix everything, to take the blame because that was easier than standing there and letting someone hate you. But something had cracked inside me, something old and tired and worn out from years of being the one who always took the high road while everyone else paved it with my damn back. I leaned against the side of the truck, folding my arms, letting her words whip around me like a storm I didn't have to outrun anymore. "Funny," I said, my voice low and steady in a way that made her blink for a second. "I don't remember you caring about my life when you were tossing my memories in the trash like yesterday's leftovers." She started to say something, mouth twisting around whatever insult she was about to throw, but I cut her off with a sharp wave of my hand. "You want the truth?" I asked, pushing off the truck and taking a slow step toward her, feeling every word burn in my throat before I even said it. "Here it is. If I don't live there, I don't pay for it. Seems pretty damn fair to me." Behind her, I could see Mom standing in the doorway, her face crumpled with confusion and hurt, her hands twisting the hem of her apron the way she used to when she was trying not to cry. Dad stood stiffly behind her, his face carved out of stone, not saying a damn word, just watching it all fall apart like maybe he thought if he stayed quiet long enough, none of it would be real. Jenny let out this wounded, furious noise, part scream and part sob, and I could almost see the gears in her head turning, trying to figure out how to turn this all back on me, how to make me the villain in the story she had written where she was always the poor. "Misunderstood heroine. You're doing this because you're jealous." She spat, tears streaking her cheeks now, her fists clenching at her sides. "You've always hated me because Mom and Dad love me more." For a second, just one brief, wild second, I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so goddamn insane that even now, even with the walls crumbling down around her ears, Jenny couldn't see anyone but herself. But I didn't laugh. I just shook my head slowly, feeling that cold, final weight settle in my chest, the one Sandra had warned me about. "Sometimes," I said quietly, so only she could hear it, "doing the right thing feels like shit." Sandra's voice echoed in my head, steady and sure, and I realized she hadn't been talking about the legality of it all when she said that. She had been talking about the human cost. The way standing up for yourself sometimes means tearing down everything you once believed was worth saving. Jenny opened her mouth again, but I was done listening. I turned away from her and climbed into my truck, slamming the door harder than necessary just to feel the satisfying finality of it. As I started the engine and pulled out of the driveway, I caught a glimpse of Mom through the living room window, her small frame shaking with silent sobs she couldn't hold back anymore. The sight hit me harder than anything Jenny had screamed, harder than the guilt that had been gnawing at me for days, because no matter how right you are, no matter how justified your actions might be, there is a particular kind of heartbreak that comes from hurting the people who taught you how to love in the first place. I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white, my chest tight with something too messy to name, and I told myself over and over again that this was necessary. That sometimes you have to burn the old bridges to keep from running back across them when the nights get cold and lonely. As I turned the corner, Leaving the house and the wreckage I had created behind, the sound of my mother's quiet, broken sobs drifted through the open window and into the night, following me down the street like a ghost I knew would haunt me for a long, long time. The first night after everything blew up, I barely slept, tossing and turning on my worn-out mattress while the city hummed outside my window like nothing had changed. Like the world could somehow keep spinning even after you detonated the only real home you had ever known. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mom's face, wrinkled and wet with tears, and heard the ghost of her sobs in the back of my mind, a sound I knew damn well would stay with me longer than anything Jenny had screamed in the heat of the moment. But beneath the guilt, the deep, ugly kind that digs into your ribs and refuses to let go, there was something else growing, something quieter and more dangerous in its own way. It was peace, or at least the first jagged, unsteady steps toward something that might one day feel like peace. It felt like standing barefoot on broken glass, every breath hurting, but knowing you would still keep walking because anything was better than standing still in the place that had been killing you piece by piece for years. I spent the next few days laying low, ignoring every call that buzzed across the screen of my cracked phone, letting the voicemails pile up without so much as a glance. Mom called 3 times the first night, then twice more the next morning. Dad called once, didn't leave a message, and never tried again. Jenny, on the other hand, lit up my phone like she had discovered a whole new reservoir of rage, leaving furious voicemails that swung wildly between threats and pleas, each one more unhinged than the last. I listened to the first few out of some sick sense of duty, then stopped when it became clear she was just looking for a new fight, a new way to drag me back into the chaos I had clawed my way out of. I wasn't going back. Not this time. Word got around town faster than I thought it would. Some people, old friends mostly, called to tell me they understood, that family only got to wipe their boots on you for so long before you had to kick back. Tom bought me a beer and clapped me on the shoulder with the kind of look that said he didn't judge me one damn bit. Others, the ones who still saw my family through rose-colored glasses, made sure to let me know how disappointed they were, how selfish I was for abandoning the people who raised me. It stung more than I wanted to admit, the way old wounds always do when someone finds them and presses just a little too hard. But I reminded myself over and over that nobody had been standing next to me when the bills piled up, when the weight of it all threatened to snap my spine in half. It's easy for people to preach forgiveness when they never had to live under the crushing reality of someone else's expectations, when they never had to sacrifice their own dreams just to keep someone else's afloat. One night, after too many beers and not enough food, I found myself driving past the old neighborhood, the wheels turning without me even really thinking about where I was headed. The streets looked smaller somehow, the houses older and more tired than I remembered, like they had been frozen in time while the world moved on without them. I slowed when I reached my parents' house. No, not my parents' house anymore. Not really, not after what had happened, and pulled over to the curb, cutting the engine and sitting there in the dark, engine ticking as it cooled in the night air. The porch light was off, the windows dark except for a faint glow from the living room where the old TV was probably still playing the same reruns Dad loved to watch. But it wasn't the darkness that punched the air out of my lungs. It was the sign planted in the front yard, swaying slightly in the breeze. For sale. In big, bold, unforgiving letters. There it was. The final nail. The proof that what I had done wasn't just a private fracture, but a public, irreversible break. They were selling the house, my childhood home, the place where I learned to ride a bike, where Mom patched my scraped knees and Dad taught me how to change a tire, where birthdays were celebrated with lopsided cakes and Christmas mornings felt like pure magic. All of it boxed up, priced, and waiting for some stranger to come along and decide what it was worth. I sat there for a long time, hands clenched so tight around the steering wheel that my knuckles ached, staring at that sign until the letters blurred together. I had wanted to hurt Jenny, to make her feel even a fraction of the betrayal and abandonment that had hollowed me out year after year. I had wanted Mom and Dad to realize that their silence, their constant turning away from everything hard and uncomfortable, had cost them more than they ever imagined. But I had not meant for this. I had not meant to kill the only place that had ever felt like home, even if that feeling had been fading for a long, long time before any of us were willing to admit it. There is a price to peace, I realized that night, and sometimes it costs more than you think you can pay. Sometimes it costs more than you even have to give. Sitting there in the dark, with the for sale sign creaking in the wind and the ghosts of 100 better memories crowding the back of my mind, I couldn't tell if I should feel proud for finally standing up for myself or broken for everything I had to lose to get there. Maybe it was both. Maybe it always had to be. The thing they never tell you about getting what you want is that sometimes, once you finally have it in your hands, it feels a hell of a lot heavier than you thought it would. For the first time in years, my life was quiet, no calls in the middle of the night asking for help with bills, no guilt trips over missed dinners, no more balancing 2 jobs just to make sure someone else's lights stayed on while mine flickered in the dark. I rented a small apartment on the edge of town, nothing fancy, just 4 walls, a bed that didn't creak too much, and a little kitchen that smelled like burnt coffee no matter how many times I cleaned it. There was no one waiting for me when I got home, no nagging requests to fix this or buy that, no passive-aggressive sighs over what I could have done better. There was just me, my worn-out recliner, and the faint buzz of the television filling the space so the loneliness didn't get too loud. And for a while, that was enough. For a while, it even felt like victory. I kept telling myself I had done the right thing, that standing up for myself after years of being the fallback, the silent fixer, the one they all leaned on but never really saw, was something to be proud of. I repeated it like a mantra on nights when the guilt curled in my stomach like something alive and hungry, chewing through every reason I had given myself for pulling the trigger on the whole damn mess. Maybe I thought I hadn't just paid off their mortgage all those years. Maybe I had been paying for the truth the whole time, slowly, painfully, without even knowing it. Maybe the real cost wasn't money, but the illusion that we were ever a normal, happy family, the kind of family that pulled together instead of pulling each other apart when things got hard. Maybe what I had really bought was the right to see things as they were, stripped of the pretty lies we all tell ourselves just to keep breathing. Some days that thought was enough to carry me through. Other days it felt like a boulder strapped to my back, dragging me down into places I didn't want to go. I got a new job, nothing special, just steady hours and decent pay, enough to cover rent and groceries and leave a little left over for things like beers with Tom on a Friday night or the occasional impulse buy at the hardware store even when I didn't really need anything. I stopped checking social media, stopped going to the old haunts where I might accidentally run into someone who would look at me with that tight, pitying smile and ask, "Have you talked to your family lately?" Like they didn't already know the answer. Most nights, I kept busy enough not to think about it too hard. But some nights, when the world got too quiet and the only sound was the ticking of the cheap clock over my kitchen sink, I would sit there and wonder, what if I had just swallowed my pride one more time? What if I had let Jenny keep the house the way she wanted, let Mom and Dad pretend nothing was wrong, kept on paying the bills and pretending I didn't mind? What if I had chosen peace over pride, even if it was the kind of peace that suffocates you slowly a little more every day until there's nothing left? I would stare at the ceiling in the dark, feeling the weight of all the roads not taken pressing down on me, knowing there was no map back to what I had lost, not even if I wanted there to be. Then there were the calls. Not every day, not even every week, but enough that I never really got to forget. They would come in late at night usually, when I was too tired to think straight, when the walls felt too close and the doubts too loud. The screen would light up, casting a ghostly glow in the dark room, and there it would be, Mom and Dad flashing in bold letters, the familiar ringtone cutting through the silence like a knife. I never answered. Not because I hated them, God, I didn't hate them, but because I didn't know what I would say if I did. What do you say to the people who taught you how to love and then asked you to set yourself on fire to keep them warm? What words could stitch up wounds that deep, that invisible, that old? Sometimes I would pick up the phone, thumb hovering over the green button, feeling the pull of 100 memories dragging me back, Christmas mornings and scraped knees, the way Mom used to hum while cooking dinner, the way Dad used to ruffle my hair when he thought nobody was looking. But then I would remember the feeling of standing on that porch, hearing Jenny's shriek in the dark, seeing Mom's face crumple under the weight of a truth she refused to acknowledge, and my hand would fall back to my lap, the phone buzzing until it went silent again. I told myself I needed more time, that I would call back when I was ready, when the anger and the sadness didn't feel so tangled up together that I couldn't tell one from the other. I told myself that forgiveness was a process, not a decision, and that maybe someday we would find our way back to something like family, even if it would never look the same. Maybe that was true. Or maybe some things, once broken, stay broken. The last time the phone rang, it was nearly midnight, the rain tapping against the windows in a steady rhythm that sounded almost like a heartbeat. I sat there in the half-dark, staring at the glowing screen, feeling the weight of the moment settle around me like a heavy blanket. Mom and Dad. The thumb hovered. The clock ticked. The rain kept falling. And this time, I didn't tell you if I answered.